Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Juliet Singler coming to you with week 15 of History of Rock and Roll. And today we're going to talk about the 90s, all kinds of new directions that are coming up in the 90s. By the way, this week I've put up a discussion question for you. I think you're going to really enjoy this discussion question because it features a great artist who's only 9 years old, DJ Michelle, who's going to show you her skill at being a DJ in a rap song. You have already probably shared your research project online. If you haven't done so already, please do that. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989. Hey, I think Pink Floyd should get a little credit for that. Remember their album, The Wall? They had a whole concert tour where they would build this enormous wall, and by the end of the concert, the wall would come down. Perhaps you remember their famous song, Just Another Brick in the Wall. It has all the school children, right? They're being oppressed by their masters at school. And basically, it's making a statement against totalitarian governments. So I think Pink Floyd should get a little credit for the coming down of the Berlin Wall, along with President Reagan, if you remember his famous speech where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall." 1991, we have the first Gulf War with President Bush and a recession. By 1992, Clinton was voted in for 2 terms. The economy started coming back, largely due to advances in the tech industry. Clinton had a terrible sex scandal that plagued him. He was impeached. He stayed in office. There was also a lot of racial tension bubbling up. Perhaps you remember the Rodney King beating that happened, and it led to race riots in all over the country, but especially Los Angeles, South LA. Then also, we had controversy over gun violence. So 1999 was the Columbine school shootings with 13 dead. And all of this showed us that the youth were really angry. And a lot of this anger and feeling of disenfranchisement was expressed in the music of the day. The media showed that they could give 24-hour coverage of violence and even war. This was chilling to me to be able to see on TV hour by hour coverage of strikes that were being made in Iraq. And movies tapped into this violent culture. Reality TV was also bubbling up and showing maybe the worst side of humanity, but it racked in great ratings for very little cost. Sites like Napster made recorded music available to everyone. This was part of the influence of the tech advances that had been made, led by Silicon Valley in California. Well, there were a lot of copyright infringements, and eventually that site came down. But as you know, you can still find free music on a number of different sites, and a lot of it still does violate copyright laws. I wanted to say a little something about that. You know, it used to be in the Middle Ages that there was no concept of ownership when you created a work of art. The belief was that everything belonged to God, was inspired by God. And so no one would think of charging you for the privilege of using something that they had written. But of course that changed, and I think that musicians have a hard enough time as it is. So if they're depending on some of their income to come from copyright sales, then they deserve it, right? It's hard to make a living as a musician. There are a number of people who have, been sued because of copyright infringement. Basically, the thing is this: if you are going to use someone else's creative works, then you ask for permission, pay for permission if you're required to, and then you use it. And if not, then you don't. If you do use it without permission, then you may be subject to a lawsuit. Usually, they won't come after you unless you're making some money at it, but you never know. So best thing is to go ahead and ask permission and pay for permission. Give credit. Well, there were also lots of college radio stations and college media outlets, newspapers, etc., that were promoting alternative rock groups and indie groups. And there were also independent labels. So I've put up a link to one of the labels that promoted indie artists. It's called Merge Records of North Carolina. And this is a beautiful short video. I recommend that you start watching it at about 3 minutes into the video, and you'll learn a little bit about Merge Records, which was a story that's kind of typical of these small labels. They basically just had to be very courageous to go ahead and promote bands and carry bands that maybe didn't have a lot of economic appeal, but they thought that they had high artistic goals. Grunge was big in the 90s, and it showed kind of the underside of this entitled middle class. I think I related before that grunge and punk in the US were different than in the UK. In the UK, there was more economic disparity between the upper class and the lower class, very little middle class. So a lot of the youth in the UK were destitute, and they turned to music as just something they could do because they couldn't get jobs, something they could do to express themselves and to fill their time. In the US, it wasn't so much the case. Like, the US at this time had a larger middle class, and I have some personal experience because I have a niece who was a runaway as a teen in the Seattle area where the grunge movement was starting. So she was from a good, solid middle class family, and she had people she could turn to. She had work that she could find, and that wasn't the case for the youth in the US. So you can kind of see the spirit of entitlement in the song by Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. We talked about this a little bit before, but it bears repeating. Even the title, Smells Like Teen Spirit, is kind of a smack in the face of the establishment. It's as though they're saying, okay, Teen Spirit represents a deodorant. It represents school spirit. We'll show you how spirited we are. We don't even wear deodorant. We're the grunge movement, right? We don't have school spirit. We don't think that life is going to be very rosy in the future. And you can even hear in lyrics, the lyric where they say, entertain us, right? That there's a little bit of this spirit of entitlement. It has a kind of a dark tone. Now, groups that followed Nirvana maybe were not quite as dark in their tone. We'll talk about a couple of those groups later. But what we find with alternative rock groups that are coming up in this era is that oftentimes at the beginning they shunned fame, but when they became famous, they started to make different choices and move towards mainstream. We had the alternative rock band Pearl Jam that made news in the 90s by suing Ticketmaster to lower prices. They didn't feel like Ticketmaster was making it affordable for their fans to attend the concerts, so they actually sued Ticketmaster. And then you have Red Hot Chili Peppers, another alt rock band from California. And with this band, you can see that they're influenced both by punk and funk. They rose to fame with their album Blood Sugar Sex Magik in 1991. And there's an exciting song I want you to listen to from that album. It's called Give It Away. And when you hear this song, you're going to hear how the groove of the song that comes through in the drums, bass, and guitar is so important. It's just a typical AABA form, but that groove makes it into a hit song. George Clinton of Parliament was one of their earlier producers, and he would have been proud of this song because it really shows their funk influence. Alternative rock groups like Foo Fighters, Foo Fighters was started by one of the players from Nirvana, and Weezer showed a little more humor and irony than some of the earlier groups that they came from. So we were looking at these groups and thinking they have a little lighter tone in general in their lyrics. Green Day is one of those groups that moved more from this rough punk influenced sound to a more mainstream sound. And you have to wonder, is that a hazard of fame? Were they moving more towards mainstream because they wanted to keep the concert sold out? I don't know. Their song When I Come Around from 1995 shows how a simple contrasting verse-chorus form that's held together by only 4 chords can still work its way into a very tight hook in the chorus. And I'll let you listen to that on your own when I come around from 1995. What's happening in heavy metal? Well, a lot of new things. We talked before about some of the diversification that has come up in heavy metal, and I shared with you my favorite diversification there is that band called Metalachi that combines heavy metal and mariachi. And they're a current band. But in the 90s, you had metal combining with rap for groups like Anthrax, Kid Rock, and Faith No More. And then some groups were going even heavier. For instance, the group Korn, Korn, used a 7-string guitar, which just gave it a thicker, more lush sound to achieve this heavier sound. And then other groups took their example and followed suit. Then you had metal combining with industrial and electronic sounds and kind of a goth spirit for groups like Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson. And I want you to listen to the song Hurt by Nine Inch Nails from 1994. Well, it's showing you that they can use noise at the beginning of a song and kind of have a free meter at first. Minor, even there's a dissonant chord that comes through to set the tone for these lyrics that are about self-mutilation. And then, listen for the end, there's this ominous chord at the end that will make you think, well, something's happened. We talked already about the college media and independent labels. In addition to Merge, there was the label Matador that brought indie pop artists to recognition. And one thing I want to mention about these indie artists is that they were very diverse in style. There was no one format. Some of them were more acoustic, some of them were more hard driving and heavy metal sounding, but all of them were groups that maybe couldn't find success right away and didn't want to with a major label. And so they opted for the alternative market. Neutral Milk Hotel was an indie group that leaned towards more of a folk acoustic style and then also did some kind of experimental avant-garde things. Their song In the Aeroplane Over the Sea from the album of the same title is an iconic album. So when you listen to this song, you're going to hear that it's all about creating different textures. There's even horns that come in at one point. And they also keep the form flexible. They start with a particular form, but then it shifts. Beck was an artist who was more on the mainstream end of the indie spectrum. And the song to listen to from him is Loser from 1994 because it's about a slacker character. And this character is something that pops up a lot in grunge and alternative rock and indie rock of the 90s. So he's the ultimate slacker character. It's based on only one chord. This is perfect. Like, what could be more slacker than just having one chord for the entire song, right? It's perfect. And then finally, alternative country became a new genre with groups like Uncle Tupelo and Ryan Adams. If you like country music, I think you'll enjoy some of these alternative country rock groups of the 90s. I wanted to mention what was going on with some of the female indie artists. They were growing in strength and numbers. Yes, the female indie artists were growing in strength and numbers, led by artists like Liz Phair, Annie DeFranco, and Sleater-Kinney. Also, there was an entire concert tour that was founded by Canadian musician Sarah McLachlan. It ran for 3 years, 1997 to 1999. And it was revived in the summer of 2010. So it consisted solely of female solo artists and female-led bands. I hope you have a great week, and I'm interested to hear what your research shows. You're going to find a link to this short video I've posted for you on Merge Records. They're one of those typical indie labels that promoted these early groups. Goodbye now.